An elderly black man was ridiculed at the U.S. Navy SEALs Recruitment Center, but when they saw the tattoo on his neck, everyone went silent, and then, panic set in. He had walked through the gates quietly, his boots worn, his back a little stiff, his shoulders steady, like someone who'd carried more than just a pack in his lifetime. His skin was creased by time, his presence ignored, dismissed, even laughed at. He didn't fit the mold. No one saw a warrior. No one saw a man. They saw old age, rust, irrelevance. The kind of man young soldiers poke fun at to puff up their own egos. He wasn't in uniform, he didn't bark orders, he didn't march like a recruit. So, naturally, they thought he was a joke. They didn't just underestimate him, they erased him. Until he rolled up his collar to wipe sweat from his neck, and that's when everything shifted. But let's go back a few hours. He had stood at the registration table like everyone else. Behind him, the air buzzed with adrenaline and testosterone, young men comparing scars they didn't earn, bragging about fights they never had, some barely old enough to drink, some just out of high school, all of them giddy with anticipation. Then they saw him, the outsider. They nudged each other, pointing, laughing like children who had just found the punchline to a cruel joke. A group of them whispered, loud enough to be heard, "He must be lost, or looking for the VA clinic." One added, "Maybe he's the janitor." Another scoffed, "Probably here to pick up someone's laundry." And the last one, the boldest of the bunch, stepped forward with a smirk carved into his face and said, loud and clear, "Hey, Grandpa, did you take a wrong turn? This ain't bingo night." The entire room broke into laughter. The man didn't respond. He didn't flinch. He just handed over his form. The staff sergeant behind the table barely glanced at it. He blinked twice, looked up, then down again. You're applying for the SEAL Challenge program?" The disbelief in his voice was like a slap. "Sir, this program is for—" He stopped himself, realizing his words would sound worse than the ones being thrown by the recruits. The man simply nodded, calm as ever. "All right," the sergeant muttered, trying not to look ridiculous himself, "suit yourself." And just like that, he was processed. The ridicule didn't stop. During stretches, someone tossed him a walker as a joke. In the weight room, a recruit faked pulling a back muscle, shouting, "Oh no. I caught the grandpa syndrome." A few even filmed him quietly, giggling as he struggled with an out-of-date treadmill. The mocking wasn't just casual, it was orchestrated. It was humiliating. Every step he took was a reminder that he was not welcome there, not respected, not seen as worthy. Even the instructors joined in, letting the taunts slide, laughing silently, letting the disrespect fester because, to them, he was a ghost in the wrong timeline. Until that moment. It happened during a break, just outside the obstacle course. The sun was blazing, sweat soaked through every uniform, and the old man, like everyone else, bent down to drink water. That's when one of the recruits noticed something unusual under his collar, dark ink, weathered by age, but sharp enough to make him lean in. The recruit's face twisted. Confusion. Recognition. Then, disbelief. He reached out. "What is that on your neck?" The man didn't move. But the recruit pulled the collar back, and froze. The others gathered around. Jokes at the ready. One more round of laughter coming. But instead, they stopped breathing. The ink was no ordinary tattoo. It was a mark banned decades ago. A symbol that hadn't been seen in years. It was the sigil of Protocol Zero, a brutal, secret test once used to identify the most elite operatives the Navy had ever created. Not just SEALs. Not just warriors. Monsters. Ghosts. Men who were pushed beyond human limits. The kind of men who didn't just survive war, they carried it inside them. And the tattoo on his neck? It was real. No one could fake that. No one would dare. The instructor, who had spent hours ignoring him, stepped forward. His voice cracked. "Where did you get that?" The old man stood. Finally, he spoke. "I earned it." That's when the sergeant turned white. Panic rippled across the field. Radios were picked up. A call was made. Somewhere deep inside the base, a red file was opened, one that hadn't been touched in over 30 years. A file with his name on it. Marked, deceased. So who was this man? Why had his record been buried? Why had he come back now, after decades, to a place that had erased his legacy and left him to rot in silence? And more importantly, why were the Navy SEALs so afraid of him? Because the truth is, some legacies can't be buried. Some men don't just fade away. Some men come back not to be remembered, but to remind. What did he survive? Why was Protocol Zero shut down? And why did everyone who ever completed it disappear? Stay with us. The truth is just beginning to surface. To every black viewer tuning in right now, this story is for you. Here on Plow of Twist, we stand firmly against any form of racism, discrimination, or injustice. We believe that your stories, your strength, and your legacy matter. You are seen. You are valued. You belong. Enjoy this emotional and powerful journey we've created with heart and respect. And hey, don't forget to subscribe to Plow of Twist and hit that like button if this story speaks to you. Now, let's begin. Norfolk, Virginia was the kind of place that wore its history like a badge, old brick buildings resting beside modern steel, military presence lingering in the air like salt from the nearby sea. Every corner whispered discipline, hierarchy, and legacy. It was a town that fed off the pulse of the Navy. Soldiers passed through like seasons, but the structure of the system never changed. Orders. Ranks. Respect, given only when earned and usually only to those who looked like they belonged. In the heart of this, nestled within one of the Navy's largest training installations, was a modern SEAL recruitment hub, a place where the strongest were built, tested, and often broken before they could carry the trident. That's where he showed up. Not with ceremony. Not with swagger. Just with purpose. Marcus Holloway had always been a quiet man. At 67, he had no interest in attention. His clothes were simple, military-cut slacks, boots so broken in they moved like second skin, and a gray windbreaker zipped just above his chest. He didn't look like anyone special. His face was worn, carved deep with time, the kind of face that looked like it had seen everything and stayed silent about most of it. His eyes were darker than his skin, and they didn't blink too often. He walked like a man who had once run, a man whose knees had been through wars even if no one remembered which ones. But most of all, he moved with patience, the kind that came from pain, from waiting, from knowing that the world didn't move for you, so you learned to wait for your moment and take it. Marcus had lived in the shadows of this country's history, not because he wanted to hide, but because he had learned long ago that not every truth was welcomed. Born in Baton Rouge but raised in a foster home in Detroit after his mother died from untreated asthma, a result of being denied care at a whites-only clinic, Marcus had grown up hard and early. By 17, he was in the Navy, one of the first black recruits pushed through the silent corridors of elite training units at a time when integration was a word said louder than it was practiced. He didn't complain. He didn't rebel. He endured. But none of the wide-eyed recruits knew that when he walked through the base gate that morning. To them, he was just an old man with stiff joints and no place in their world. The base had changed. Sleek buildings with polished floors, digital check-ins, biometric scanners. But beneath the modern gloss, the culture remained the same. Prove yourself or get out. No exceptions. Especially not for someone like him. At the front desk stood Sergeant Blake Morano, mid-30s, tall, shaved head, sharp jaw, white, and cocky in the way that came from generations of validation. He wasn't a bad man, just a deeply entitled one. He had grown up around the Navy, his father had served, his uncle had died in combat, and his older brother had been a SEAL for 6 years before an injury sent him home a hero. Blake believed in bloodlines, in brotherhood, in knowing who came from where. He believed in looking the part. And Marcus didn't. Behind Blake, pacing slowly, was Commander Eric Talbert, a man of influence at the base, respected and feared. Early 50s, ex-SEAL, tight-lipped. His past was a long line of rumors and honors, with commendations he never talked about. He had the final say in everything that happened on the training field. The kind of man who didn't need to shout to be obeyed. His silence could be louder than most screams. Then there were the recruits. Terrence T.J. Reeves was the loudest. Barely 22, cocky, fast-talking, always trying to be funny. He was black too, but his allegiance was with whoever had the loudest laugh and the highest rank. He had a scholarship, a great record, and a need to be liked by the white boys. His biggest fear was being seen as different. Next to him was Andrew Bishop, red-haired, lean, from North Carolina. The kind of kid raised on war stories and backyard rifles. And finally, there was Kyle Mercer, golden boy, straight-A athlete, with the kind of blonde hair that always looked freshly cut. Together, they made up the new wave of Navy hopefuls, filled with bravado and hunger, eager to carve their names into the legacy they believed they were born to inherit. When Marcus walked past them that first morning, the room tensed. Not from respect. From discomfort. He didn't speak. He simply walked to the desk and handed in his application. Sergeant Blake barely looked at it before glancing up at the man in front of him, raising one eyebrow with disbelief he didn't try to hide. "You serious?" Blake asked, one side of his mouth twitching like he was holding back a laugh. "You do know this is the Navy SEALs Challenge program, right? Not a community center for veterans." Marcus didn't respond. He just nodded. Blake looked him over once, then held up the form with a slight shake of his head. "All right, man. You wanna try? Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you when your hip gives out." TJ cracked up. "Damn, Grandpa, you sure you're in the right building? You look like you came here to fix the plumbing." More laughter. Andrew muttered something about reverse recruiting. Kyle smirked and leaned over to whisper to TJ, but loud enough for Marcus to hear. Maybe he thought SEAL meant SeaWorld and he was applying to be Sheamu's trainer. The laughter was explosive. But Marcus didn't flinch. He was assigned a locker. Uniform. Schedule. They told him to report to PT in the morning, physical training, with the rest of the candidates. He accepted it all in silence. The next morning, he showed up before the sun, already stretching while others still rubbed sleep out of their eyes. He didn't make conversation. He didn't correct the ones who kept calling him Gramps or old-timer. When one instructor tried to get rid of him quietly by assigning him to watch from the sidelines, Marcus simply said he came to work, not to watch. The man shrugged and let him join, probably hoping he'd quit after a few push-ups. He didn't. By the end of the week, his body ached. His legs burned. His lungs pulled tight. But he didn't stop. When TJ cracked a joke about Marcus taking naps between drills, he said nothing. When Bishop started pretending to walk with a cane during laps, mimicking Marcus's gait, he ignored it. When Blake, the sergeant, assigned him cleaning duty, unofficially, as a favor, Marcus did it. Silently. No complaints. But he was watching. Each day he watched the way Talbert monitored the program, the way Blake bragged too loudly, the way Kyle never got punished for skipping reps, the way TJ flinched every time authority barked near him, pretending it was a joke but showing the fear underneath. Marcus saw the cracks, the lies, the boys pretending to be warriors. He didn't say a word. Not yet. No one knew why he was really there. No one asked. To them, he was an anomaly. A mistake in the system. Someone to laugh at until the paperwork caught up and booted him out. They didn't know about the letter that had come 2 months earlier, the one without a return address, written in code, calling him back for unfinished business. They didn't know he hadn't come for glory. Or recognition. Or redemption. He had come for something else. But first, he would let them underestimate him. Let them humiliate him. Let them believe he was nobody. Because Marcus Holloway had spent a lifetime being dismissed. And now, he was ready to make them remember. The second week on base turned colder, not because of the weather, the air still hung thick with the humidity of Virginia mornings, but because of how they looked at him. Not with curiosity anymore, but with irritation. Marcus wasn't just ignoring their insults, he was surviving them. And that made him dangerous. He hadn't missed a single drill. He hadn't complained about a single assignment. He took whatever they gave him, and somehow, he did it better than expected. That wasn't supposed to happen. His presence had been a joke, a convenient outlet for the recruits' insecurities and the instructor's unchecked superiority. But the more he endured, the more it exposed something none of them wanted to face, that maybe, just maybe, they weren't as strong as they thought they were. TJ, who had started the week still cracking jokes and nudging others whenever Marcus walked past, began growing quieter during drills. Not because he had found respect, but because his numbers weren't matching up. Marcus was running faster. Holding longer. Climbing higher. And he was doing it without the noise, without the flexing, without the crowd. That made TJ nervous. He pulled Blake aside during a break behind the equipment shed and lowered his voice. "Yo, Sarge, what's the deal with the old guy? You seriously just letting him stay in the program?" Blake didn't look up from his clipboard, flipping pages. "He passed the physicals. Doesn't matter if I like it or not." TJ looked frustrated, chewing on the inside of his cheek. "Man, this is making us look bad. I mean, if he stays and actually makes it through, what does that say about us?" Blake glanced up now, his expression shifting. "Then you better step up and make sure he doesn't. He doesn't belong here. You know that. I know that. Just push him. The old always break eventually." And that was all TJ needed to hear. Over the next few days, the tone shifted from mockery to something darker. Recruits started quietly upping the weights on Marcus's gear before drills, switching his assigned run routes with longer, harder ones, and, accidentally, forgetting to tell him about schedule changes. Twice, they left him behind at training sites, forcing him to find his own way back. No one said anything. Marcus didn't ask. He just showed up again the next morning, bruised, but there. One afternoon during the Water Endurance Challenge, Kyle Mercer intentionally removed Marcus's flotation vest from the gear bench before the test. He watched from the dock as Marcus, unaware, dove into the water with full gear. The instructors didn't catch it, or pretended not to. The recruits held their breath. Marcus didn't surface for nearly 40 seconds. When he did, it was with a sharp gasp and a fury in his eyes that vanished the moment he reached the edge. He pulled himself up, dripping, his body shaking from the cold, and walked off the dock like nothing had happened. But the silence that followed was heavier than any insult they'd ever thrown. Later that day, Kyle smirked at the group while they stood in line for chow. "Man's got lungs, I'll give him that. Probably used to swimming through the sewers back in his day." Marcus was walking past just then, and TJ laughed harder than he should have. But as Marcus turned his head and looked him in the eyes, just for a second, TJ went quiet. It wasn't a look of anger. Or hurt. It was disappointment. That cut deeper than anything. That night, something shifted in TJ. He found himself sitting alone on the steps outside the barracks, picking at his protein bar, when Marcus sat down beside him, slowly. TJ didn't say anything at first. Neither did Marcus. The silence hung between them like smoke. Then, Marcus finally spoke. "You ever wake up knowing your name means nothing to anyone around you?" TJ glanced at him, then away. "Every damn day, man. That's why I'm here. Trying to make it mean something." Marcus nodded slowly. You think the ones laughing at me are going to care if you make it? TJ swallowed, his throat tight. Nah. But if I don't, they'll make sure no one ever forgets. Marcus looked out across the yard. Making it ain't about them remembering. It's about you not forgetting who you are while they try to strip it from you. TJ didn't respond. But he didn't move either. Inside the main facility, Blake and Commander Talbot were watching more than just performance metrics. They were tracking psychological reports, injury records, internal behavior logs. And Marcus's file, or lack of it, was causing concern. Blake slammed a folder down on the desk. There's nothing on this guy. No medical flag. No prior fitness program. Not even a current service record. He's not on any list. Talbot narrowed his eyes. That's not possible. Everyone who steps through that gate has a file. Blake shook his head. He has one. But it's sealed. Like, top-tier classified sealed. I requested clearance and got hit with a wall. Talbot leaned back slowly, tapping his fingers against the table. So someone sent him here. And they don't want us to know why. Blake was growing more agitated. He's messing with the team. They're losing focus. And he's making me look like a fool. Talbot stood. Then do something about it. Not with your mouth. With the system. Let it chew him up. And so it did. Marcus was reassigned to fire watch twice as often as any other recruit. His bunk was moved to the furthest end of the barracks. He was given the oldest boots, the heaviest pack. Nothing that could be proven as discrimination. Just subtle sabotage, masked as routine. But Marcus, as always, adjusted. Not with anger. Not with complaint. Just quiet, defiant perseverance. During tactical drills, Marcus began asking questions that weren't part of the curriculum. Phrasing commands in ways only someone with deep operational knowledge would. The instructors brushed it off at first, but when he began correcting errors in the briefings, tensions rose. One day, during a scenario involving infiltration planning, Marcus pointed out that the blueprint they were using was outdated by 2 years, and explained why the emergency exit had been sealed in a renovation contract. Blake snapped at him, embarrassed. You think you know better than the system, Holloway? Marcus didn't blink. No. I just remember when the system still knew what it was doing. That answer cost him 4 hours of extra cleanup duty. Still, he didn't argue. Kyle, who had been quiet since the water incident, began keeping his distance. He noticed the shift in the air. The old man wasn't just surviving, he was teaching. Not officially. Not with lectures. But with presence. With actions. The other recruits, especially the quieter ones, started watching Marcus more closely. Copying his warm-ups. Asking him low-voiced questions about how to manage stress, how to pace breathing, how to deal with sleep deprivation. And he answered them. Not with ego. Just with truth. One morning, before dawn, TJ approached Marcus as he laced his boots. I found your locker open last night, he said, hesitating. I think someone went through your stuff. Marcus just nodded. They won't find what they're looking for. TJ studied him. What are they looking for? Marcus stood up. A reason to be afraid. The word settled like dust. Back in the command office, Talbot had been watching footage. Surveillance. Infrared. Marcus moved like someone trained to avoid attention. Like someone who still didn't fully trust that the walls weren't listening. Talbot didn't want to admit it, but something about the man unsettled him. Not the age. Not the defiance. It was the control. The calm. Like someone who'd faced worse than this and came out colder, sharper. Deadlier. On the 6th night, an internal memo landed in Blake's hands, encrypted, brief, with a clearance level above his pay grade. It had one line, Do not interfere with subject 0A, observe only. Blake's hands trembled. The next morning, for the first time, he didn't speak when Marcus walked by. But something was building. The silence in the barracks grew thicker. The recruits, the instructors, even the command staff, they could all feel it. Like the pressure in the air before a storm. The way Marcus moved now, with a quiet alertness, like he knew something was coming. Like he was waiting for someone to make the next move. What no one understood yet was that Marcus wasn't waiting for permission. He was waiting for the truth to catch up with the lies. And when it did, nothing on that base would ever be the same again. The morning of the classified exercise began like any other. Recruits gathered at the edge of the training compound, where the temporary command post had been set up. Portable tents, tables filled with laminated maps, crates of gear, it all looked routine, another day of tactical drills and endurance tests. But something felt different. The instructors were tenser. The briefing was shorter. There were no jokes. The sky above Norfolk was heavy with low clouds, and the wind pushed across the asphalt like it knew something the rest of them didn't. Marcus stood at the edge of the group, silent, eyes sweeping across the landscape like he was memorizing it, like every shadow had meaning. He wasn't just present. He was preparing. Blake stepped forward, clipboard in hand, voice sharp. Today is a full scenario sim. High risk, high stress. We're running Operation Bishop Echo, classified protocol. You will not be briefed beyond your direct objectives. No one outside this team knows the setup. No live rounds, but treat every situation as real. There will be observers in the field. Follow orders, watch each other's backs, and prove you deserve that trident. TJ shifted on his feet, glancing toward Marcus, who hadn't moved. There was a strange calm to him, like he had seen this exact scenario before and already knew how it would end. Kyle stood further back, arms crossed, trying to mask the unease growing behind his eyes. Andrew whispered something to one of the instructors and got a sharp shake of the head in return. Whatever this drill was, it wasn't normal. As the group split off and moved into the woods, Marcus's team was assigned a breach and recover mission on a simulated hostile compound deep within the training perimeter. They moved through the tree line quietly, weapons up, formation tight. Blake had assigned Marcus as rear support, hoping he'd fall behind or, ideally, fail. But Marcus moved with precision, every step measured, every angle covered without instruction. TJ couldn't help noticing. Again. After an hour of sweeping, they reached the mock compound, plywood structures built to mimic an urban war zone. The wind was louder now, catching in the gaps between the walls. They spread out, checking doors, watching corners, preparing to breach. That's when it happened. A siren. Not part of the exercise. A high-pitched, warbling alarm that made even the instructors look up from their posts. Then silence. Blake's radio crackled, and a voice came through, clipped, urgent, unfamiliar. All field units, hold position. Do not engage. Repeat, hold position immediately. Blake looked down, confused. What the hell is this? Marcus was already moving. He walked past the team without a word, toward the command tent set up on the far side of the compound. Blake shouted after him, "Holloway, get back in position," but Marcus didn't stop. The other recruits hesitated, watching, unsure if they were still in a drill or if something real had just begun. At the tent, Talbot stood with two men in suits, no ranks, no name tags, earpieces in their ears. One of them was holding a red folder. Marcus approached calmly, his voice low but clear. "Took you long enough." Talbot's face went pale. One of the men in black stepped forward. "Mr. Holloway, we need you to come with us." Blake arrived seconds later, breathless, eyes darting between faces. "What the hell is going on? What is this?" The suited man looked at him. "You don't have clearance." Blake turned to Talbot. "This is my base, Commander." Talbot didn't meet his eye. "Not anymore." Then one of the recruits, TJ, emerged from the trees, moving toward them. He had followed Marcus, not by command, but by instinct. He heard everything. Marcus looked at the younger man, and for the first time, he spoke plainly. "You want to know the truth? You earned that." TJ looked confused, but didn't back away. "What truth?" Marcus pulled down the collar of his shirt slowly, revealing the tattoo beneath his neck in full for the first time. Not just a symbol, but a pattern of coordinates, a serial, and an emblem TJ didn't recognize but immediately felt like he should. The suited man flinched. "This," Marcus said, "is the mark of Protocol 0. Blake scoffed. "Protocol what?" Talbert's voice broke in for the first time, brittle and tight. "A ghost program. Decommissioned in 91. Buried so deep no one was supposed to speak of it." TJ whispered, "You were part of it?" Marcus nodded. "Not just part of it. I was the last one. The final subject. The only one who made it through alive." The silence that followed was a vacuum. Marcus turned back toward the rest of the recruits, who had now gathered, drawn by the noise, the tension. Kyle, Andrew, others, all frozen. "They created us to be tools. Not soldiers. Weapons. They tested limits no man should have crossed. Broke bodies. Broke minds. Then when we survived, they erased us. Labeled us threats. We weren't heroes. We were liabilities." Blake stepped forward. "You expect us to believe this?" Marcus stared him down. "You don't have to believe anything. The mark believes for me." TJ asked, quietly, "Why come back now?" Marcus looked at the others. "Because someone activated the protocol again. That drill you're running. The structure, the mission, it's a blueprint. From one of the original Protocol 0 tests. They're rebuilding it. And you're the next test subjects." Talbot didn't deny it. The two suited men exchanged a glance. "He's correct. The directive came from higher. We didn't know he would be here." Marcus turned slowly, his tone sharper now. "You built this place on the graves of men like me. You trained these boys with shadows you hoped they'd never recognize. But I remember every name. Every scream. Every lie." Blake was still trying to understand. "So what are you then? A spy? A weapon?" Marcus looked at him, not with hate, but pity. "I'm the reminder." In that moment, the wind hit hard, sending the tent flap open and knocking over a table of maps. The recruits stared at Marcus not with confusion anymore, but with fear. Not because he was dangerous. But because they knew he had endured something they couldn't imagine. And he was still standing. TJ stepped forward, slowly. "What do we do now?" Marcus looked up at the clouds, as if waiting for the next move. "That depends," he said, "on how long you're willing to stay quiet, before you become what they tried to make me." And then, from the hills above the training zone, more black SUVs began to appear. The test was never over. It had just begun. And Marcus Holloway wasn't part of it. He was the final stage. The black SUVs rolled down the ridge in absolute silence, their matte bodies absorbing the gray light of the sky like phantoms. No sirens. No insignias. Just dark windows and cold intention. As they moved across the gravel path toward the makeshift command post, a sharp tension split the air, thick enough to stop movement mid-breath. Every recruit on the field went still, unsure if they were watching a government operation or stepping into the jaws of something they were never supposed to see. Marcus didn't turn to watch them arrive, he had already felt them coming. The sound of polished engines humming low, the rhythm of control disguised as calm, he knew that cadence. It had haunted his life since the day they first branded him as an experiment and not a man. TJ backed a step instinctively, eyes darting to Marcus, voice barely controlled. "Who the hell are they?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "They're the ones who erase what the country isn't ready to admit." Blake reached for his sidearm out of reflex, but one of the suits raised a hand before he could even grip it. "Don't be stupid, Sergeant. You're not in control anymore. None of you are." Commander Talbot kept his stance stiff, but the perspiration across his temple betrayed him. He wasn't afraid of gunfire or war, he was afraid of exposure. Of truth walking straight into his neatly constructed command and peeling it apart thread by thread. He stepped toward Marcus, lowering his voice so only they could hear. "What's your endgame here? You think blowing this open will change anything? You think they'll believe you?" Marcus didn't blink. "I didn't come for belief. I came to make sure no one else gets buried in the name of silence." TJ stood beside them now, jaw clenched, heart pounding. He had never seen Blake so pale, never seen Talbot reduced to a man instead of a title. What the hell was Protocol Zero really for? Marcus finally turned to him, voice softer than before, but carved with weight. "It was built to test the extremes of human obedience. They pushed us until we either broke, or turned into something they couldn't control. Out of 18, I was the last one breathing. And when they realized I'd seen too much, felt too much, they buried me under paperwork and silence. Told the world I died in combat. Told me I was free. But freedom doesn't come when your past still owns your name." Blake's voice cracked as he tried to regain command. "This is national security you're screwing with. You're dragging these kids into something that's way beyond. They were already dragged in the moment you made them part of this drill." Marcus cut in, his tone suddenly sharp enough to slice through steel. "This wasn't just training. You modeled this entire scenario on one of the final protocol runs. And you didn't tell them. You wanted to see who would fold. Who would lead. Who would break. Just like they did with us. Except this time, you wrapped it in permission and called it progress." TJ looked around at the others, Kyle, Andrew, the rest, all silent, eyes wide, their breath caught somewhere between disbelief and rage. The lines between simulation and reality had collapsed, and in that collapse, something sacred had cracked. The illusion that their sacrifice meant something. That this system, this institution, played fair. It was gone. Replaced with something rawer. More dangerous. One of the suited men stepped forward now, voice clipped and surgical. "We're placing this facility under temporary lockdown. All communication will be suspended. Recruits will be quarantined for debrief. No one leaves until the containment is complete." TJ's voice shot out like a bullet. "Containment? We're not a virus. We're soldiers." The man didn't look at him. "Your data. And right now, your variables are unpredictable." That was the trigger. Kyle pushed forward, his posture no longer smug but furious. "You lied to us. You made us believe we were part of something honorable. You're using us like test animals." The agent remained unmoved. "Control is necessary. In war, and in training for it." Marcus stepped in front of them all. "Then it's time someone reminded you that control built on silence is still slavery." The words landed like thunder. Silence pulsed. Then, a quiet beep came from one of the agent's earpieces. He paused, listened, and nodded once before looking directly at Marcus. "You've been greenlit." Blake stammered. "What does that mean?" Marcus smiled faintly, but there was no joy in it. "It means they can't silence me. So now, they'll try to make me disappear. Again." Talbot stepped forward, suddenly desperate. "You don't understand what's at stake here. There are protocols, there are consequences." Marcus's eyes blazed. "Consequences like the ones that left my brothers in body bags without names. Like the ones that sent my file into a vault and told my sister I died a hero when I was rotting in a government lab for 2 more years. TJ's chest rose with every breath. We can't just stand here and let them do this. Marcus looked him dead in the eye. Then don't. What happened next wasn't part of any script. Marcus raised his hand slowly, reaching into his pocket with care. The agents tensed. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a single flash drive, black, unmarked, smooth as stone. He held it up to the sky. This has everything. Every name. Every operation. Every lie they thought would never be uncovered. Talbert's voice went hoarse. You'd betray your country? Marcus's expression was fierce and steady. No. I'm saving it. The lead agent signaled, and two men began to move in. But then, a shockwave of sound. From the edge of the forest, a voice shouted, "Put your hands off that man." All heads turned. Out stepped a woman in uniform, full admiral's badge gleaming, stern eyes burning with recognition. Her voice carried power, but more than that, conviction. Admiral Yvonne Carter. Internal oversight. I've been tracking this for 18 months. The agents froze. She stepped beside Marcus, facing the crowd. He's telling the truth. We've found buried intel confirming not only Protocol Zero, but an active plan to restart the program under new designations. This entire facility has been compromised. But not anymore. Blake staggered. They lied to you too. Carter looked at him like he was a child. No. You just weren't important enough to tell the truth. Marcus handed her the flash drive, his hand trembling slightly. For the first time, he let it show. Don't let them bury them again. Carter nodded. They won't. Not this time. As she turned to the agents, her voice became iron. Stand down. Orders have been revoked. I've got full jurisdiction, and if you move on that man, I'll have every one of you court-martialed before breakfast. The agents didn't move, but they knew. It was over. TJ stepped beside Marcus, shoulder to shoulder, like a son next to his father. What happens now? Marcus looked out over the compound, then back at the recruits. Now they get to choose. Who they want to be. Who they're willing to fight for. And who they're no longer willing to let decide their worth. And for the first time, the silence that followed didn't feel like fear. It felt like freedom. The wind had changed. It wasn't just the arrival of Admiral Carter that shifted the weight of everything, it was the collapse of something much larger, something built over years of tradition, deception, and silence. The compound was no longer a place of power, it had become a battlefield of truths. Recruits stood where they'd once trained, eyes darting between the figures of authority they had trusted and the man they had once mocked, trying to comprehend which direction meant justice and which meant betrayal. The realization settled in slowly, like fog on cold steel, everything they believed in, every command followed blindly, every uniformed word drilled into them, it had all been constructed on a history no one was supposed to know. And now, they couldn't unsee it. Admiral Carter moved with authority, issuing verbal commands into her earpiece as MPs began appearing along the tree lines, armed not with rifles but with legal jurisdiction. The suited agents, still motionless, held their silence, their power dissolving like mist under a morning sun. Marcus stepped back from the flash drive now in Carter's hands, and for the first time since he arrived, his shoulders sank slightly. Not in defeat, in release. As if decades of pressure had finally bled out of his bones. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't angry. He was simply present, grounded in a reality he had spent years waiting to confront. The base was still running, lights still humming in the tents, instructors standing at post, but the illusion had died. And with it, the hierarchy began to fracture. Talbert had not spoken since the arrival of the Admiral. His silence was deliberate, his mind clearly locked in calculation. Not fear, not even shame, but survival. He had the eyes of a man who knew how to pivot, how to reframe a narrative, how to wash blood off a uniform without leaving a stain. He approached Carter carefully, posture rehearsed, voice low. He didn't plead, he reasoned. Spoke of national security, of the dangers of unearthing classified programs, of the consequences of releasing sensitive operations into the public domain. This will destroy reputations, he said calmly. It will destabilize morale. Our allies will question our integrity. This man, whatever his experience, could bring down a structure too big to rebuild. Carter didn't flinch. Then it was never strong enough to begin with. That moment, that line, landed harder than any bullet. Meanwhile, the recruits had begun to drift into factions, not by intention, but by instinct. Some leaned into disbelief, still clinging to the order they had known, unwilling to accept that they had been pawns. Others moved toward Marcus, not because he asked them to, but because something inside them demanded alignment with a truth bigger than themselves. TJ stood close, eyes fixed on Carter and Marcus like he was witnessing the first real battle of his life. Kyle paced nearby, conflicted, fists clenched, jaw tight. He wanted to say something but didn't trust his voice. Andrew sat on a crate, arms crossed, anger flashing beneath the surface, not at Marcus, not even at Carter, but at the realization that he'd trained under a false banner, and that the men he had admired were more actor than warrior. Then came the briefing, not in a private room, but out in the open. Carter called them all together, instructors and recruits, agents and officers, and for the first time, a real debrief happened where no script existed. She explained, in as few words as possible, the core of the operation that had been discovered. Protocol Zero had been decommissioned 3 decades prior, but elements of its philosophy had survived, repackaged under new names, embedded into covert training regimens, sold to private contractors and experimental divisions. The current training compound had been selected as a trial site for resurrecting parts of the methodology under enhanced evaluation metrics, a euphemism for psychological manipulation under combat stress. What they thought were routine drills had been coded stress simulations meant to test loyalty, fear, and command collapse thresholds. They weren't just training soldiers, they were trying to manufacture submission. And Marcus, once the system's greatest variable, had been their measure of failure. The air after Carter's explanation was thick with quiet disbelief. Then came the choice. You all have a decision to make, she said, her voice steady but not unkind. You can walk away from this compound today with a sealed file, a fresh start, and no trace of what you witnessed. You'll be placed into other units, other programs. No black mark. No consequences. That option is on the table. Or, you can stay. You can testify. You can join the inquiry. It will be public. It will be long. And it will not be easy. She looked at Marcus, then back to the crowd. But if you choose to stay, you'll be part of ending something that should have never started. Silence. Then movement. Some stepped back. Not out of cowardice, but out of conflict. Out of fear for their families, for careers they had barely begun. No one blamed them. No one shouted traitor. It was understood that the cost of truth was not equally bearable for all. But some stepped forward. TJ, of course. Kyle, a moment later. Then 2 more. Then 5. Then half the group. A line was being drawn, not between good and bad, but between those ready to fight for something new and those too damaged to let go of the old. Marcus said nothing during all this. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. But as the group began to break apart, Carter turned to him. You said earlier you didn't come for belief. That you came to make sure no one else got buried. Well, it's happening. They're waking up. But what about you, Marcus? What now? His eyes locked onto hers, tired but alive. Now I make peace with the ghosts that followed me here. Carter understood. She nodded. Then let's do this right. As evening fell over Norfolk, the compound became a different kind of battlefield, not one of bullets, but of decisions. Every corner pulsed with tension as the MPs took over security, as the agents were quietly escorted off-site, as Carter prepared her report. Talbot was relieved of duty pending federal inquiry. Blake was questioned for hours, and while he tried to frame himself as a pawn, the logs and footage told another story. He had known. Maybe not the full scope, but enough. Enough to twist the screws deeper when Marcus wouldn't bend. Enough to play God in a place that was never meant to be a church. TJ spent that evening sitting alone by the edge of the field, the dirt under his boots dry and cracked. He didn't speak when Marcus joined him, just nodded. They didn't talk about what happened. They didn't talk about what was coming. They just let the silence sit between them like a brother. Finally, TJ broke it. I always thought strength was about noise. About how loud you were in the room. But you just stood still. And everyone felt it. Marcus looked at him, smile faint but proud. Sometimes, the loudest men are just trying to drown out the sound of their own doubt. TJ exhaled through his nose, laughing softly, painfully. They'll still come after you. You know that, right? Marcus nodded. They already did. Everything after this is just noise. But he knew TJ was right. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. There were still people in power who would rather burn the truth than let it breathe. But now, they weren't fighting in the shadows. Now, the light had found them. And what was once buried, would no longer stay hidden. The night settled over the compound in heavy silence, not the peaceful kind, but the type that clung to the walls like fog, thick with everything that had not been said, everything that still waited to unravel. The tents were dimly lit, casting long, shifting shadows against the dirt paths where so much had been built and broken. Marcus sat alone near the perimeter fence, not out of isolation, but out of habit. He was a man accustomed to quiet, a man whose thoughts moved deeper in the dark. In his hand was a folded photo, edges frayed, the image faded by time and sweat. It showed a group of young black men in fatigues, laughing despite their surroundings, arms slung around each other with the defiant joy of survivors. Marcus stared at it long, remembering names that had never made it home, stories that had never made it out. Behind him, footsteps approached slowly. He didn't need to turn. TJ's presence had a rhythm now, grounded, slower than it had been days ago. Humbled, but fuller somehow. I couldn't sleep, TJ said after a moment, dropping onto the bench beside him. Every time I close my eyes, I hear them talking about us like we were nothing. Just pieces on a board. Disposable. Marcus didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the photo. TJ leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low. I used to think being a soldier meant you were part of something bigger. Something solid. Like, honor would wrap around you and protect you. But now I wonder if I was just chasing the shape of it. Marcus finally spoke, voice soft but sharp. You were. We all were. But chasing the shape of something real isn't weakness. It means you believe it can exist. TJ looked over, pain flickering in his expression. Do you still believe that? Marcus folded the photo and tucked it into his jacket. I believe it can be built. But not from the top. Not from men in suits behind closed doors. From the ground. From people like you, deciding not to look away. The young recruit shook his head slowly. They're going to spin this, aren't they? Water it down. Make it a glitch in the system, a few bad decisions. Then sweep it away. Marcus's tone hardened, not with anger, but resolve. Maybe. But not if we keep speaking. Not if we keep standing. Truth doesn't vanish. It just waits for people brave enough to carry it. A few yards away, inside the command tent, Admiral Carter was seated with her back to the flap, reading through classified reports illuminated by a single desk lamp. Her brow was furrowed, eyes scanning line after line of data, financial transfers, shell programs, training logs disguised as research trials. She had known there were fractures in the system, but not this deep. The resurrection of Protocol Zero wasn't an accident. It was orchestrated. And someone, somewhere, had given it the green light long before Marcus ever set foot back on that base. She looked up as Marcus entered without knocking. She didn't ask how he knew she was still there. "You've seen enough to know this won't stop here," he said, stepping into the light. "You've stirred something they were sure had been buried." Carter looked exhausted but alert. "Then I'll make sure it stays surfaced. The inquiry's been greenlit. Congressional oversight's on standby. But it won't be clean. They'll fight it with every tool they have." Marcus remained still. "That's why I need something from you. Not for me, for them." She leaned back slowly. "Name it." He laid a file on her desk, one he had carried for years, unseen by anyone but himself. It held names, operation codes, locations. Survivors. Witnesses. Ghosts who had learned to live without justice. Give them voices. Real ones. Let them speak, on record. Let the world know what was done to them, who did it, and why no one stopped it. Let them be more than statistics. Carter nodded, then paused. "And you?" Marcus hesitated. "Then, I've done my part. I was the first one through the door. Let them be the ones who walk through it now." By dawn, word had begun to spread. Not through news reports or official statements, but through whispers and glances, text messages and unread emails. In nearby barracks, instructors sat with heavy eyes, some bitter, some relieved. A few packed quietly, reassigned or voluntarily stepping down. Others, like Blake, had refused interviews, choosing silence over accountability. But silence would no longer protect them. The footage had been collected. The files copied. Carter's team had ensured every document was duplicated, every story recorded. Outside, Marcus stood beside the track where he'd once been laughed off. Now, recruits walked past him with nods, not forced, not ceremonial, but real. Some still kept their distance, unsure how to face what they had witnessed. Others approached him, unsure what to say, settling instead for presence. Among them was Kyle, his jaw tighter than usual, his words reluctant but honest. "I didn't believe you. I didn't want to." Marcus said nothing. Kyle continued, voice quieter. "But now I can't stop thinking about all the times I laughed. All the things I said. All the ways I let them convince me you were nothing." Marcus looked at him, expression unreadable. "What you do now matters more than what you said then." Kyle swallowed. "Then I'm staying. I want to testify. I want to be part of fixing this." Marcus nodded once. That was enough. Back inside the compound, a new team had arrived. Independent observers, mental health professionals, ethics advisors. It was no longer a training base, it had become a crucible of reform. TJ had agreed to record his account that afternoon. He stood in front of the camera, palms sweaty, voice trembling, but he didn't stop. He told them about the jokes. The sabotage. The fear of being left behind. The shame of laughing with the wrong side. And the moment it all broke, not with violence, but with a man who didn't raise his voice, didn't retaliate, but made silence a weapon. Outside, Marcus watched the sky shift from morning gray to a muted gold. He knew they would try to paint him as a relic, a casualty of a darker time, a ghost best forgotten. But ghosts had their purpose. They reminded the living of what had been lost. What must never be repeated. As Carter approached from the tent, she stopped beside him, both of them looking out toward the rising sun. "They've started calling it the Holloway effect." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a medical condition." She smiled. "It's what they're calling the shift. The way recruits are questioning command. Asking deeper questions. Pushing back. It's scaring the hell out of some of the brass. He allowed himself a rare laugh. Good. She paused. You're leaving soon, aren't you? Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. His presence had always been temporary, just long enough to break the silence. The rest belonged to them now. To TJ. To Kyle. To every recruit who now walked the line between loyalty and conscience with their eyes open. And as the compound buzzed with new energy, as the systems of deceit began to splinter, Marcus Holloway, the man they had erased, the warrior they had buried, finally stepped away from the place that had once tried to break him. And in his wake, he left something far more powerful than fear. He left the truth. Days passed, but the compound no longer felt like a place built to harden men, it felt like a place waking up from a long and painful sleep. The structure remained, the buildings and training fields still there, but the atmosphere had shifted in ways no command directive could reverse. There were fewer shouted orders, fewer eyes cast downward out of fear or duty. In their place was a heavy, honest silence, the kind that lingers after something sacred has been broken, and everyone is still trying to decide what it means. The program hadn't shut down, but its purpose had cracked wide open, its myth shattered by the weight of a truth no one could ignore anymore. Marcus hadn't left yet, but he had stepped back. He no longer stood in the center of the compound, but on its edges, often seated on the same bench he'd claimed that first week. It had become his quiet post, the one spot where he could observe the aftermath not as a soldier or a symbol, but as a man. From that distance, he watched the recruits move differently, some lighter, some burdened by new awareness. They weren't the same boys who had mocked him days ago. The jokes had stopped, but not because they were afraid. They had simply outgrown the need to cover their discomfort with laughter. There was a weight now behind their eyes. An ache. A reckoning. They were learning what it meant to see someone and truly understand the cost of ignorance. TJ approached one morning just after sunrise, his uniform jacket slung over his shoulder, a legal pad in hand filled with handwritten notes. His face was more tired than before, but more certain. He sat beside Marcus and exhaled long before speaking. I read through your entire file, he said, flipping the pages without looking at them. Not the sanitized version they gave the press. The real one Carter gave me. The one with the mission logs, the failed operations, the psychological assessments. You were 26 when they sent you into that tunnel under Kandahar. 26, and they knew you wouldn't come out the same. Marcus didn't speak. He just nodded slowly, the memory washing over him like the weight of dust he'd spent decades trying to scrub from his skin. TJ went on. The notes said you didn't crack, but you stopped talking for 14 days after extraction. They thought you were broken. But then you started writing. Pages and pages. Debrief journals, all of them classified. You told them exactly what you saw, what went wrong. And they ignored every word. They didn't ignore it, Marcus finally said, his voice deep and even. They archived it. They knew what it meant. They just didn't want to accept the cost. TJ turned to him, his voice cracking slightly. How did you keep going? After all of it? After they buried you alive, told the world you were dead. Marcus took his time answering. He didn't rush. Because even in the silence, I believed someone would need the truth someday. And when that day came, I couldn't afford to be too broken to speak. TJ looked down at the pad in his lap. I want to carry that. I don't know if I'm ready, but I want to try. Marcus gave him a rare look, something close to pride. It's not about being ready. It's about being willing. The compound had slowly begun to take the shape of a place where healing could begin. Not by orders or discipline, but by choice. Admiral Carter had remained longer than anyone expected. She oversaw the new command staff handover, coordinated with legal representatives, and met personally with every recruit who had agreed to testify. Her presence wasn't performative, she sat in the mess hall during meals, walked the grounds without an escort, spoke to janitors and lieutenants the same way. She wasn't cleaning up a mess. She was rewriting the manual. One night, she found Marcus sitting alone again, this time with a manila envelope in his lap. She didn't ask what it was. She just sat beside him, both of them looking out at the quiet courtyard lit by amber lamps. "We're finally declassifying parts of Protocol Zero," she said without preamble. "It's going to raise hell. Senators are already bracing. Some are trying to stop it before it lands in public hands. But it's moving." Marcus didn't flinch. "Then they're afraid. That's good." She smiled faintly. "Do you want to be there when we release it?" He shook his head slowly. "No. This isn't about me being seen. It's about what they see when they look at themselves after reading it." Carter glanced at the envelope. "What's in there?" "Letters," he said. "To the families of the others. The ones who didn't come back. The ones whose files don't say dead or missing. Just redacted. I owe them truth." She nodded slowly. "Do you want me to help deliver them?" He finally looked at her, his eyes weary but alive. "I wouldn't ask if I didn't trust you." Meanwhile, TJ and Kyle had taken on leadership roles within the remaining group of recruits. Not by appointment, but by the kind of respect that can't be taught. They helped facilitate open discussions about what had happened, invited in counselors, led physical drills with a different energy, one built not on domination, but connection. Kyle, once too proud to question, had learned the power of listening. TJ, once too eager to be accepted, had learned the power of speaking up when silence was safer. They gathered one evening with the others in the open field where the final simulated mission had taken place. No gear. No weapons. Just a circle of men who had walked through fire together and come out scarred but not shattered. Kyle stood with his hands in his pockets. "I used to think that strength meant getting through the program without blinking. That it meant pushing past pain, ignoring weakness. But that was never strength. That was fear." Andrew, who hadn't said much in the days since, finally spoke from where he Saturday. "So what do we do with all this now? What happens after the truth comes out?" TJ responded, voice steady. "We build something better. And we make sure the next ones don't have to fight two wars, one on the field, and one just to be seen." It wasn't a grand speech. But it landed. They all felt it. Marcus watched from a distance, arms crossed, heart heavy but still beating with purpose. He didn't need to be in the center anymore. They had found their way. And that, more than anything, was the beginning of something new. In his quarters, he packed slowly. He wasn't heading back into obscurity. He had made arrangements with Carter to serve as an independent consultant, not for the military, but for oversight groups, educators, youth programs. He wouldn't wear the uniform again, but he would make sure it meant something when others did. Not because of tradition, but because of truth. On his bunk, he left behind one thing, a folded note addressed to "the next one who dares to stand." Inside was a simple line: "They may silence your voice, but never let them silence your purpose." Then he walked out, not through the side gate or hidden in shadows, but through the main entrance, shoulders square, eyes forward. This time, they all saw him. This time, no one looked away. And though he said nothing as he passed, everyone knew, Marcus Holloway had not been defeated. He had become the legacy they were never supposed to have. The day the declassified files were released, it didn't come with fanfare or a press conference. It arrived like a quiet storm, with a single upload to a secured digital archive, shared first with the families of the lost and forgotten, then to the press, and finally, to the public. The documents contained no sensational language, no narrative embellishments, just truth. Raw, ugly, undeniable. Timelines. Names. Procedures. First-hand accounts that had been locked away for decades. The fallout came fast. Headlines flooded the news cycle, former officials went into hiding, hearings were scheduled. Social media erupted with hashtags, with stories from veterans who finally felt seen. Some tried to discredit the files, calling them relics of a chaotic past, but the evidence was too precise. Too personal. The silence had been broken, and there was no undoing it. Admiral Carter remained at the center of the investigation, testifying before oversight committees and confronting resistance with calm ferocity. Her leadership was no longer about rank or title, but about integrity. She dismantled networks that had profited from silence, initiated reforms in how training was monitored, and created a permanent archive to preserve the testimonies of those who had endured. She became not just an officer, but a guardian of accountability. Her name would go down in history, not because she followed orders, but because she finally questioned them. TJ went on to graduate from the program, not under the traditional model, but through a restructured framework that prioritized critical thinking over blind obedience. He became a leader not by command, but by action. He returned months later, not as a recruit, but as a speaker, standing before new classes of hopefuls to share not how to endure pain, but how to recognize injustice and stand up to it. He founded an advocacy initiative for young recruits from underrepresented communities, helping them navigate the military with awareness, strength, and voice. His transformation wasn't into a soldier who carried a gun, it was into one who carried truth. Kyle also stayed. He completed the program, quieter now, less concerned with approval and more driven by principle. He had learned that strength without humility is just noise, and that leadership means more than standing in front, it means taking responsibility for who stands behind you. He and TJ worked together often, their early tension replaced with a bond forged not in similarity, but in shared growth. Kyle eventually joined the military ethics branch, helping review and revise procedures that had gone unchecked for far too long. Where once he followed, now he led with conscience. Blake was dishonorably discharged. Though he tried to defend his actions, claiming he was a product of a broken system, the recordings, reports, and testimonies left no room for ambiguity. He was stripped of rank, removed from all command responsibilities, and quietly disappeared from the public eye. His fall was not dramatic, it was appropriate. He became an example, not a martyr. As for Commander Talbert, he faced a choice: testify and accept accountability or fight a war he had already lost. He chose the former. In a closed-door session, he admitted to facilitating the restart of Protocol Zero, justifying it with vague terms like national preparedness and strategic innovation. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. But there was a fracture in his voice when he spoke of the day Marcus walked onto that base. He said it reminded him of everything they'd buried and everything he'd once believed in before he stopped asking questions. His rank was removed. His record tarnished. He now lives under federal supervision, prohibited from ever holding a position of authority again. And Marcus? Marcus Holloway didn't stay in the spotlight. After the release, after the final hearings, after the archive was open to the world, he stepped away quietly. But his impact didn't fade. He spent the next few years speaking not from stages, but from community centers, schools, places where young black men walked in with the same questions he once carried: am I enough, will they see me, what will I have to give up just to be respected? He spoke of dignity, of patience, of the strength in restraint. He visited the graves of the forgotten and read their names aloud into the wind, no cameras, no speeches, just memory made sacred. The tattoo on his neck remained, not as a mark of pain, but as a warning and a testament. He never asked for recognition, but he became a legend anyway, not for what he survived, but for what he built from the ashes. He died peacefully 10 years later, in a small home outside of Richmond, surrounded by a circle of former recruits, friends, and family who had become his real unit. His passing wasn't met with military salutes or medals. Instead, it was marked by silence, a pause across every base where his story had been told. A moment of stillness to honor the man who reminded the system that silence was not the same as peace. Now, I want to speak directly to you. What did you feel when Marcus walked through those gates, alone, laughed at, underestimated? What burned inside you when you realized the truth he carried had been buried for decades? How did it feel to watch those who mocked him realize they were standing in the presence of someone greater than they could ever imagine? This story isn't just about military training or government secrets. It's about how we see people. About how many Marcus Holloways have passed through rooms, offices, classrooms, streets, ignored, dismissed, erased. It's about what we choose to believe when someone tells us who they are, and whether we have the courage to see them before the world does. So now I ask you, who have you ignored? Who have you misjudged? And more importantly, what are you going to do the next time someone walks into your life wearing nothing but truth? Let us know in the comments what part of this story struck you the most. Was it Marcus's quiet resilience? TJ's transformation? The fall of a corrupted command? Or the simple idea that sometimes, justice doesn't roar, it whispers, and it endures? And if this story moved you, if you found yourself leaning closer, holding your breath, hoping for redemption, then you're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe to Tales of Twist for more powerful, emotional stories like this one. We don't just tell stories. We uncover what's been hidden. And sometimes, that's the most powerful twist of all.